everyone, it's Paula coming to you on behalf of Water of the Word Bible Study. I hope and pray that you're being blessed by our beautiful fall evenings just as I am. You know, you could say that, yep, I'm a sweater weather fan, and so I'm happy to say I have my sweater on this evening, and I'm happy to see that summer may finally be moving out of its awfully hot season and we're seeing cooler weather around the corner. I also wanted to drop in and give you a quick message tonight, an update, a mini recap of our last study in the book of Daniel on September the 17th. Now, if you will recall and you were there, you're going to remember that we jumped right on into chapter 1. And that chapter can be divided into 3 parts. Part 1 covers the deportation of Daniel. Part 2 tells us about Daniel's faithfulness while living in Babylon. And Part 3 speaks to us about Daniel's reputation and how he kept it while in exile, living in a foreign nation. So, what can we bring to you this evening? What can we summarize? Well, the first thing that we learned about in our class were the immediate circumstances confronting Daniel. The year was around 605 BC. Daniel was 15 years old. His days were marked by chaos. His days were marked by insecurity. His days were marked by moral collapse as his country began to disintegrate. And on the throne was a wicked king named Jehoiakim, who ruled his people with a ruthless hand and in a wicked, wicked way. Jehoiakim ruled out of selfish ambition, and he really was all about protecting his own power and his own comforts and his own life and securing his position as king. But you see, he in actuality was a vassal, an appointed king by Egypt's Pharaoh Necho. So you could say he was a puppet to Pharaoh Necho. He had formed an alliance with Egypt, the enemy of Judah, because they needed military protection against Babylon. And in turn, Egypt levied unbelievably high taxes on Judah, which Jehoiakim was more than happy to pass along to the people. He did not pay him out of the king's treasury. No, he plundered the income and the livelihood of his own people and stripped their wealth from them. And Judah now was on the brink of being economically bankrupted. So, I want you to note with me, Jehoiakim was Jewish. He'd made the deal with Pharaoh Necho, but he still was Jewish. His grandfather Manasseh had ruled in an equally evil way, and they both turned away from Yahweh instead of turning to Yahweh in the time of distress. So instead of turning to Yahweh, Jehoiakim turned to Egypt. Now, we may wonder and scratch our heads at that one, but you see, he thought he could continue in his evil abominations and the practicing of a mixture of worship with both the pagan gods and the one true God, while he abused his people and then went on to live his life any way that he saw fit. So the opening of chapter 1, however, tells us that the days of Jehoiakim and his evil ways were about to catch up to him. In fact, our text tells us that when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to siege Judah, God, I'll say it again, God gave Jehoiakim over into the hands of the Babylonians. Now we may ask, why would God do such a thing? Well, the short of it is, God never does anything unless he tells his prophets first, and they're to tell the people. So God had warned the people that this was coming. He was unhappy with the sins and practices of Judah and Jehoiakim. And let me tell you this, God, when he has his hands on his children, will do the discipline necessary to bring them back into a place of correction and right relationship with him. And so he was about to discipline his children, Judah, all through the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. So the answer probably is a little more complex than that, but that's it in a nutshell. Now, during that first siege, what I want you to know is that Jehoiakim began to betray his people in a worse way than he had before. The taxes and the oppression and the harsh living conditions were bad enough. But when Nebuchadnezzar came and invaded Jerusalem, Jehoiakim began to bargain with Nebuchadnezzar, just as he did with Pharaoh Necho. And what he did was he even turned over his top captains, his mighty men of valor, the Bible tells us, and his skilled craftsmen. That would be like our truck drivers, our longshoremen, our Walmart workers that keep our life going, our grocery workers. He turned them over into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. And we find that included with his surrender of his people, his skilled craftsmen, were his nobles of his own royal court, his own household. And these included Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, in verse 3, we're introduced to a new character whose job is to be the master of the eunuchs for Nebuchadnezzar. And the text tells us that he was given charge over these 4 young men, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And what this implies is that perhaps because Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, was in charge of the eunuchs in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, he trained them for service to the king and the patron god Marduk, that perhaps they had turned these 4 young men into eunuchs as well. So what a horrible, horrible, awful, and shocking time this must have all been for Daniel. And being from a righteous family, being righteous himself, he probably had never known anything other than his Jewish heritage and how to obey the Torah and how to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy mind, and all thy soul. And yet here he was caught in the middle of God's judgment against his nation and against his king Jehoiakim, with his life completely disrupted. Now, our class on Saturday took away some things from our study about the capture of Daniel. First, through Daniel, we learned that even during times of judgment and trial, and when it's no fault of our own, we're caught in the middle of it, God's will is good. It has a good purpose. It has a good ending. And when we are faithful, we can bank on God's favor to rest upon us, just as it did Daniel, because we belong to him. Another thing that we took away was that our times, our nation, our world is not unlike Daniel's. And so we must think about this and determine now in advance of the possible coming judgment on our nation. And we must determine in advance that we will serve God and not man. Now, I want you to know, Daniel, the Bible tells us, was wise. He possessed the gifts, the spiritual gifts of wisdom, of knowledge, and of understanding for his journey in Babylon. And these gifts came as a blessing from Yahweh, not from Babylon. They tried to impart Babylonian wisdom into the mind of Daniel, but his gifts of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding were already there as a gift from God. You know, sometimes we go looking for answers to our problems in Egypt and in Babylon. We try to make an alliance, we try to make a deal with the world to help us get out or get through our problems. But you know what? I believe that just as God gave Daniel wisdom, he gave Daniel knowledge, and he gave Daniel understanding, so too will he give it to us when we remember that God always has a purpose for the things that happen. And when we make the most of it, even what seems to be bad things, he will be faithful to give us what we need to get through it. So the time has come for me to sign off. And I hope you enjoyed this Water of the Word moment, and that you will never forget that God supplies the gifts we need to get through disasters, and that he always has a greater purpose for the things that confront us. So till the next time, when I talk to you again, I pray that you will grow as you study and consider his word in the book of Daniel, and that you will come to know, as Daniel did, the depth of God's love for you. Goodbye now, and good night.